Tonight, the Ghana Institute of Governance and Security makes a startling revelation that all petroleum agreement contracts signed between government of Ghana and the petroleum companies for exploration and other activities are illegal. We'll find out why they say so and what can be done different to maximize the benefits of oil. Also, the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAAC, is raising questions over why disbursements were made from the Ghana Stabilization Fund without due process. We'll be digging into these issues on today's big story with me, Stephen Anti. Today's big story is brought to you in association with nationwide PVC suppliers and fabricators of high-quality PVC doors and windows. Now, the Ghana Institute of Governance and Security is raising key concerns over the nature of petroleum contract agreements signed between the government of Ghana and these companies. Now, making reference to the PNDC Law 64 and 84, the group maintains that the laws are to ensure that every petroleum agreement between government of Ghana and any petroleum company is supposed to be a production sharing agreement. But it does appear, according to the group, that these agreements are rather concessional, which is actually against the letter of the law. And we're joined in the studio by Solomon Kwakume, who is with the Ghana Institute of Governance and Security. He joins me now for a discussion. Good evening, sir, and we're grateful that you could make time to join us at such a short notice.
Good evening.
Now, I'm worried that if your group says that the service agreements, petroleum service agreements between the government and these oil companies are mostly illegal, what is the basis of this?
Yeah, we are making reference to petroleum service agreement, which is quite a different issue altogether, ball game. So what we are saying is we have observed that the spirit and intent of PNDC Law 64 and 84 is production sharing agreement. Having studied the bill or the laws, there are features of production sharing agreement in it, which we have realized has been thrown away in entering into petroleum agreements and contract with the foreign oil companies.
So when you say thrown away, you want to say that it's been totally ignored?
It's been totally ignored.
Or it was maybe lightly ignored and some elements of it. What is it exactly?
Yeah, exactly. Is now under production sharing agreement, all the petroleum fields belongs to the state. To the state. Or invested in the National Oil Company. In this wise, it's the GNTC which has the law, PNDC Law 84, has invested that right, has given GNPC the sole prerogative to explore, produce, and export oil.
But it doesn't look like that's what we have.
It doesn't look like what we have. Now, what we have now is the laws or the agreements have actually given control over the oil blocks to
these oil companies, which is what you call concession.
Which is what we call concession.
And these come with disadvantages.
They come with a lot of disadvantages.
And what are these disadvantages?
Now, under the concession, what happens is the oil and gas discoveries belong strictly to
those oil companies.
Which is contrary to
what the law, PNDC Law 64 and 84
is saying. Now, what PNDC Law 64 and 84 is saying that GNPC is the sole company enacted by law to exploit oil in this country. Then at the same time, if a loan or enter into agreement with contractors to assist it to carry out those activities. So immediately the word a contractor is brought in. It is only in production sharing agreement that you use the word a contractor. You cannot use the word a contractor under concession. Now, another concession, they are doing their own business. You don't have any right. You know, since the government...
So how did this come about? I mean, I'm curious that if there is a law within which the GNPC and all state institutions that are supposed to regulate the benefits that we accrue from oil, if these institutions work and function effectively, how did it happen that we didn't follow these agreements, but we rather chose concessional agreements?
Yeah, at a point in time, what happened was... now in the NPP administration. But now let me say, oil and gas matters are not NPP
or NDC.
Or NDC.
It's state matter.
It's a state matter. So we must draw, when I refer to government, government can be NPP or NDC.
I understand.
So under the previous NPP government, they decided to do away with this sort of, they said they were going to exploit our oil under private
public partnership.
Private investors. And therefore, they brought in the model, the agreement to suit the concession.
Right. Mr. Kwakume, I'll have you hold briefly. I'll get onto the telephone line and speak to an energy policy expert, John Peter Ameu. We are grateful, sir, for joining us on today's Big Story. Good evening. Now, my key concern really is that if we look at the position that the Ghana Institute of Governance and Security is raising, they are concerned that PNDC Law 64 and 86 have been violated to such an extent that we now have more concessional agreements than product sharing, which was supposed to be the initial letter of the law. How did this come about, really?
Well, thank you. I'm not quite clear where my good friend is coming from. I don't know which part of the law he's actually quoting from.
Yeah.
But what is critical and important is the fact that the petroleum in this country, in terms of the mineral resources, belongs to the people and held on behalf of the people by the president. The PNDC law 84 referring to make categorical statements as to how companies can have access to the petroleum resources. And they can only have an access if they are granted that access by the secretary at that point in time. And so there is no specific mention of production sharing agreement in any of our production contracts or exploration law that we have. PNDC law 84 makes specific reference to payment of royalties, payment of rent, payment of other services in kind, and payment of oil in kind or in cash. Those are the specific elements that the PNDC law 84 makes reference to, even with regard to what do you call it, a CIT, which is corporate income tax. As to the element between royalty or concessionary or production sharing, as he's saying, matter, it's just a semantic. It's just a choice of words. Because you see, what is critical of petroleum agreement is that all elements that you can find in production sharing contract, you can equally have the same elements in a royalty agreement. You can have it in a concessionary agreement if you draft your agreement carefully. What matters is not the name production sharing contract or the name royalty-based driven contract. What matters is the elements that are in the contract. It is not the name. Because currently in Ghana, we are being driven largely by a royalty-based regime. Within this royalty regime, we are still doing participation. GNPC is participation, which derives the participation interest. But normally, participation takes place in production sharing, as the Riley pointed out there. So it is not a name, but it is the elements that we put in. So, for instance, in our royalty-driven agreement, we can decide to import all the elements in the production sharing contract into the royalty-driven agreement. There's totally nothing wrong about it. So I don't see where he's coming from. If you go back to the model agreement that he's referring to, model agreement specifically mentions some of the benefits that comes to the government. And what it says categorically is that it will be paid as provided in Article 10 of the PNDC Law 84.
Right.
Income tax will also be paid in accordance with the Petroleum Income Tax Law 1987, PNDC Law 118. It says that additional oil entitlement will be paid as provided in Article 10.2. Payment for rental and government properties will be done, and if there is any circumstances under which the corporation decided to back in for an additional interest, that of course will be added to the government.
So John, let me
totality,
yeah, sure.
There is nothing like a production sharing agreement in our exploration and production law for which any government would have faulted.
Right.
Let me just quickly correct this impression that he has raised, that the regime under President Kufuor has faulted by going to production sharing contract. That is totally false.
Okay.
You know, that regime, what they did categorically is to adhere to the terms of the PNDC Law 84, which gives that right to the minister, you know, to give that responsibility to contractors. And the law didn't just mention contractors. It says contractor or each subcontractor. So that doesn't mean that the mention of a contractor means that it must undertake a production sharing. Not at all.
Right.
Corporation in the law means GNPC. So a contractor just simply means an IOC, which is any international oil company that will come to partake this activity in the country.
Right, John, I'll have you hold quickly so I'll get a reaction from Mr. Kwakume. You heard John, quick reaction.
Yeah, I heard John. He's in the PNDC Law 84. There's no clause which talks about carried interest or additional oil entitlement.
So what is that?
This is participating interest, which you find in production sharing, rent payment, you find in production sharing, you find rental and corporate taxes and surface rentals too. But here, what we have currently in our law, which is a hybrid, I have spoken to the chief director of the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, and he told me what we are doing is a hybrid system between the concession and the production sharing agreement. But then we said, no, if we want to do production sharing, then let's go straight to do the production sharing, because the production sharing is more beneficial to us than the concession. Now, the concession here is we have seceded our rights over the oil blocks.
And that to you is negative.
It's negative.
And it's bad, and we do not accrue a lot of benefits. So, John, I'll quickly have to ask my next question, and then you can take a response from there. Now, despite these contractual issues, I mean, whether production sharing or concessional, how do we, as a country, in totality, how do these things affect profitability in real terms?
You see, profitability in an oil regime depends on prospectivity of the regime. Prospectivity has to do with the type of oil that you are bringing up, the quality of oil, and where you are bringing the oil from. But on top of all this, what is important is the negotiation skill. Because it is at the point of negotiation that you'll be able to import all elements right down from concessionary, royalty, and production sharing into your contract. So the point of negotiation is very critical. That is why it's important for government to make sure that when they go into negotiation table, they come along with economics, accountants, lawyers, technicians, engineers, to make sure that they negotiate well. Up to the terms of production sharing or royalty-based driven agreement, I mean, it doesn't hold water. If my friend has to talk about probably a service contract, then of course he may have a point to say, because service contracts mostly are undertaken in an oil-rich regime where you don't need to do exploration. The oil is already there, like what we are witnessing now in Iraq and Iran. There you don't need to go and do exploration.
So what, John, are you suggesting that we're not exactly doing anything wrong at all, that everything in the laws are being applied correctly, the laws that Mr. Solomon Kwakume made references to, everything is fine? Is that what I get from you?
Yeah, I think we are even doing far above, because look, what is happening is that government has introduced capital gain tax, which was not part of the law. Now that the framework allows, you know, for capital gain tax, such that if you're able to transfer your share in terms of participating in, and there is any evidence that you have an accrual in terms of profit, we can tax that in terms of capital gain. that is on top of the law. Okay? What I'm saying is that what we need to do is to go into a better negotiation. For instance, there's nothing wrong increasing our royalties. Royalties now have been increased in some of the agreement from 10% to 15%. Participation have been increased some of the agreement to 15%. So it all depends on the level of negotiation that the government goes to the negotiation table to do. If you have a very weak negotiation team, of course, you will not be able to play it very good to your country.
But
so
would you say we are doing fine with negotiations too? That we have been able to negotiate?
Well with the negotiation. That is where we need to talk about. We are not doing quite well with negotiation because our negotiation teams are not strong enough to bargain.
But perhaps that's exactly what Mr. Kwakume is saying, that if we're not doing well, then it is because we didn't put into consideration what we needed to do right from the very beginning.
I agree. You see, but his point that we are going for the wrong contract, because you can go for the production sharing, but you still have to negotiate the terms in the production sharing. If you're going for production sharing and you negotiate for royalty of 2%, what does that mean? It means a royalty base of a royalty of 10% is far better. So it is the elements you import into your contract, but not the type of contract that you run. And that is determined by the negotiation team. So if you want to say that the negotiations can be better off in terms of the elements we are importing into the contract, yes, of course, I agree with it. But if you want to say that because we are doing royalty-based, why we should be doing production sharing contract, I mean, that is a non-starter. I mean, it doesn't work that way at all.
Right, John, we're grateful, but we'll still have you hold because we have other energy-related issues we would like to come back to you and address. So a quick reaction from you, sir.
Yeah, I'm surprised Peter is not aware of the current trend in the world today.
And what is the current trend?
The current trend is production sharing agreement. Royalty tax system has been done away with. A whole lot of countries who were producing their oil under the concession under which the royalty tax system comes.
Give me an example of some of these countries.
Angola, Indonesia, Ukraine.
And they're all making great benefits.
Yes.
Moving away from this.
Nigeria, our neighbor, started with the royalty tax concession and joint ventures, and they have moved away from the concession and joint ventures to production sharing agreement and royalties. Currently, all oil contracts in Nigeria are modeled on production sharing agreement. Now, Southern Sudan, where fighting is going on, they are on production sharing agreement. Chad, Niger are all doing production.
So the key question is, what is keeping us in the concessional agreement type of system? That's what bothers you.
Yeah, why should we go for that when all countries in the world are moving away from this system to what is now currently invoked? And then we are saying, let's go for pure production sharing agreement instead of the hybrid, which is concession and production sharing. So let's separate the two and go for what is invoked and all over.
To what extent have you engaged government and the relevant agencies on this? Have they heard you? Have you spoken to them?
Oh, what is happening in government is everybody is just mute.
Over the issues you have been raising?
Over the issues. Before we started producing oil in this country, I have, since 2009, I've been advocating for production sharing agreement. And this agreement, I was the first person to sit in the studio of Joy FM with Kofi Bentil to argue this. And I'm still arguing that production sharing agreement is the best for this country. Now, that's production sharing agreement, we can give a lot of concessions and benefits to the oil companies and we'll still be better off. For example, the data given in the 10th July 28, which I use for my simulation. Now, within 15 years, we could make $26 billion as against the 19 and $20 billion projected by the World Bank and the IMF in 20 years.
Well, Mr. Kwakume, I'm afraid that our time is running out. We'll have to just leave it here, and we'll follow it through a lot more, and we'll get a lot more of the details from you and your group later on in the week subsequently, so that we can trash it down. Now, also, you may know that the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAC, is raising questions over how Ghana's Stabilization Fund has been managed. In a statement today, the group makes reference to the Minister of Finance's statement on the floor of Parliament during presentation of the supplementary budget earlier last month, and I quote, "The Ghana Stabilization Fund has been capped at 250 million, consistent with Section 23, subsection 3 of the Petroleum Revenue Act. As of May 2014, an excess of $176 million had been realized. Out of this amount, 16 million, that is equivalent of 50 million Ghana cedis, was lodged into the newly established contingency fund, and the difference of 159 million is being used for debt repayment." The PIAC subsequently now deduces that from these the disbursements have not followed due process. We're getting onto the phone line now to speak to Yao Ousuado, and then who is the chairman of the Communication Subcommittee of the Public Interest Accountability Committee. Good evening, sir, and thanks for joining us at such a short notice.
Thank you.
So I've read your statement and a lot of things you raised, but what really are you saying? Are you saying that government is wrongly spending from a fund which is meant to be a buffer?
Exactly so. We think that the attempt to withdraw money from the fund hadn't followed a due process.
And this due process to you is what? Going through Parliament?
Yeah, due process is one. That fund is, as rightly said, is a backup for the budget. And for anybody to go into that fund, there must be a condition precedent. That is to say, oil revenue must fall below a certain expectation, which the Minister of Finance himself would have set in the budget of the year. But currently, the estimation that was put there, we haven't gone below it. Therefore, that condition precedent hasn't happened. Oil revenue hasn't fallen, so there's no shortfall as the law prescribes. Again, the capping is within the mandate of the minister, but it is supposed to act prospectively, not retroactively. It shouldn't be acting going backwards.
So I mean, let's get it straight. So, if you say it should have been done retroactively, it means that he should have done it. He should have presented before Parliament before he could.
That is also another reason why we think the process was wrong. And after he has capped it, when the time came for him to go into the fund and take the capped amount, he should have called for the consent of Parliament.
So what really do you want? I mean, I know that you've made a couple of demands, but can you tell us exactly what your position is? What do you want government to do? Is it possible to make this right?
Yes, it is possible to make it right. We are saying that the minister has taken excess of about $69,034,153.16 out of the fund. And we are saying that going forward in the next quarter of the year, whatever revenue comes into the hands of government, they must reimburse the stabilization fund with the said amount. And
have you got any response from government over this yet?
Not yet. We just issued this statement today, so there hasn't been any statement.
Right.
Any reaction to it.
Right.
Now, one more thing is that all these things are happening, and I think we stated it in our release. That you see, there's a basis why all these things are happening. There's something we call benchmark revenue. It's an estimate of the revenue that we may get from oil. And we have been saying since 2011 that the estimation is not done right. The estimation it's not done right. And that is why we are always getting all these difficulties, because there's so much that comes in, but the allocation is based on the estimates that were made earlier in the budget. And if if the monies come, now we need more money to support the budget, but you see that to go into the fund and go and sit down in the fund, because the estimated amount that we thought we would get or we needed for the budget, we have already got them, but there is extra money sitting down that must go into the fund. And that is where, when these monies are going into the fund, then we want to take them and put them in the budget. So it is the estimation of the benchmark revenue which is causing all these problems for the country.
Right. We're very grateful for your time, sir, on today's Big Story. Osei is the chairman of the Communications Subcommittee of the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAC. Now, I must say that we made an attempt to get a reaction from the Ministry of Finance, and they told us in principle that the ministry would only issue a formal reaction to PIAC's statement when they have had at least 24 hours to properly engage the issues that have been raised before they comment. So we will bring you their response when we get it. We'll push for that response subsequently. So we're grateful that you could make time for us, sir. That's how we draw the curtains for today's Big Story. We'll be right back with an interactive segment. Stay with us.